Welcome back to Dr. Supercoach YouTube. You're on with Pig, and I'm continuing my pre-season series in which I get to sit down and chat with some of my favourite Supercoach content creators. Today, I'm joined by fellow Supercoach Captain Picker, a big part of the Supercoach Swordplay podcast, and the third man up Twitter, Janath. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thanks, Pig. It's a pleasure to be on. Firstly, with you as someone that I greatly admire in the community. Talking about captains, we're normally on the same page, which is pretty good, but also an honour to be on the Dr. Supercoach YouTube at the same time. It's one of the big sort of podcasts that is when you grow up listening to, and then now being a podcast yourself, it's pretty cool to be collaborating like this.
It is. I'd love to hear that. And I do. It's great when I put out my captaincy videos each week, and then I go and check the third man up Twitter. And you and Roscoe have done your captains, and when there's often quite a few overlaps, so good. We're on the same page there. We're thinking the same thing.
You think that you'd almost feel as if there's a bit of collusion going on at times, but rest assured, it is all independent thinking. We just come to this different process, the same outcome, sometimes similar processes as well.
Yeah, and as we go through this podcast, we'll have a chat about how we go about our captaincy picking, our theories around them, fixture analysis, things like that. So that's what we're going to chat about today. So I guess kicking off, for, Dr. Supercoach and Third Man Up Twitter being two of the most popular places for supercoaches to get their weekly captaincy advice. And I think it's something you've done really well in the past. What do you think the keys to selecting a good captain are?
Oh, Pig, when you say one key, I could just go on and on about these keys, but 14 keys, and that's just an insider preview. Let's say a teaser into one of the articles which I've written for the Supercoach Swordplay season guide. So it's basically taken you through my thought process when picking a captain. You'll see it when the guide's released, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I think are some of the key points there. So obviously you have, and Pig, I imagine you can flesh this point out a little bit, but I think recent data is the best metric that you can go. If you just needed to look, if you needed one thing, you got 5 minutes before the round is about to start and you need to pick a VC, the easiest thing to go off is historic data. So there's a couple of things here. So you got the sort of the last 3 to 5 round average for that play in that season. And then on top of that, you got the last 3 average at the venue that they're playing at. And then you've also got the last 3 average against the team that they're playing at. So certain players have certain bunny teams. So one example that comes to mind is like Marcus Bontempelli against Fremantle. Like whenever the Bont goes up against Freo, there's just something in him that you're like, there's a real ceiling score here. But then you sort of look at, you got players that play really well at venues. So Noah Anderson last year, I think he had about a 34-point difference between playing at home on the Gold Coast or at TIO Stadium compared to any other place in Australia. And it's just like, well, it can't just be a coincidence if it happens over a period of time. And then you have players that just go on absurd stretches in a period of season. I know last year Zach Merritt was a player that had a really good stretch in the middle of the season, and you almost felt as though you could just VC or see him and he'll just get 120 on a whim. I think against Carlton even, he got to 120 off like 15 or 16 touches when he was tagged as well. Like he's just those kinds of players that have the form. Is there any other sort of form-related metrics, Piggy, you'd want to add on there?
Yeah, there's a few. I very much agree with you about venue. I think that's one that a lot of people actually don't look at, that I know we both do, and Noah Anderson obviously being the prime example, but Brodie Grundy as well. His splits at the SCG versus away were very different. So venue being one. I probably don't look at necessarily last 3 against that team as much. I do still factor it in, but it's more, I'm a big fan, and I know you are as well, looking at the DFS, the defense versus position data, and you can actually see, over the last 5 games, Richmond have given up the most points to inside midfielders. Whoever's playing Richmond is obviously going to get a boost, likely. But sometimes it can be a bit misleading, so there's also a bit of intuition around that. Like there was a period last year where it was saying, the DFS data was showing that Rowan Marshall was a really hard ruck matchup. And I was like, no, he's not. He doesn't win the hit out much. He's actually pretty good to score against. It was just that he'd played all the bad ruckmen, so they weren't putting up scores on him. So there is a little bit of intuition around it in that way, but I mean, the DFS website, like you and I both love it. I give it a bit of a plug here. Everyone could go check that out. It's got just insane amounts of data. A lot of it for free. They've just introduced a season pass this year, which costs $10. But for $10, like you buy them
Well
two
worth
copies essentially to get access to incredible volumes of data that can really change how you think about Supercoach. And I guess we'll talk about Fixture in general later. But they've got great pieces of data there for analysing the fixture and going through who's coming up and playing who. But yeah, for captaincy, I think the fixture is incredibly important. The venue's important. I mean, sometimes the weather can be important, but I don't go into it a huge amount. But if we know it's going to be pouring down at a certain venue and maybe there'll be more stoppages, it might help, like a Max Gorn or something like that. But yeah, there's a few things there. Definitely the who they're playing, but I also the players' recent form I think is really important. And I'll admit I got tripped up on this a couple of times last year where I think it was Caleb Sarong. He started hot, had that awesome stretch of the year. But then he went on a period in the middle of the year where he was only averaging 95. I think he had a 5-round average of 95. And I was just so sucked into the fixture matchup that I was like, oh, Caleb Sarong, he's coming against Richmond. He's going to be my number one captain. But his form actually wasn't good and he didn't do that well. It was a bad recommendation. So I think it's a good mix. You've really got to take into account the player's current form as well. I mean, Tristan Cherry at the end of last year was just an easy pick because he was A, on a hot streak, and B, having really, really easy matchups. So it's a combination of quite a few things, but you can't overlook a player's form. That is one of the most important things, I think, as well.
What do you think about, something that I really like talking with you as well, Pig, is the fact that we can consider the intangibles. Like, I know from when I first started playing Supercoach, probably it's developed a bit more, but now thinking about, like, captains. So last year when we're thinking about, when we talk about captains, we're not talking about Supercoach captains, but a team's captain. So your Max Gorn, Bontempelli, Patrick Cripps, those types that you just feel intangibly are natural, like, sort of inspirational leaders compared to, for instance, and this isn't sort of a drive-by on anyone, but like a Connor Rozee, even to an extent like a Jordan Dawson, you just don't get that same feel of inspiration from them. So when the Bulldogs, Melbourne, Carlton lose, you know the following week that Gorn, Bontempelli, Cripps, unless they're injured or something, will bounce back. And we see that come through, even Sack Merritt for that instance. We see that in their Supercoach score the following week. A lot of the time you see when a player has a poor game the previous week, they bounce back big. And so that's something which I know that in your videos as well, Pig, you mentioned a lot, is like what happened the previous week can actually impact the following week's data. And then on top of that, I really think something which is it's another intangible thing that sort of goes under the radar, but going into round 24, if you're Brownlow medal fancy, there's really no way that you don't score well. Like we saw last year with Dacos, Merritt, Cripps. I don't think the Bont had the best game, but most of the time the Brownlow medal fancies do quite well in the last couple of rounds of the season to really push their stakes. So what do you think about those intangible factors that really aren't set in data, Pig, but are really quite important in the consideration?
Yeah, I mean, I really think they are important, and I also think that kind of the fun plays as well sometimes. There's a bit of emotion or a bit of story behind it. You can paint a narrative. I absolutely, I agree, especially those 4 captains you mentioned. You didn't mention Merritt at the start. He was one I was going to add into that mix, but absolutely. I think it's a big thing, and especially when their team has a bad loss. They're criticised in the media. Gorn was one for this last year a lot. Melbourne cut a few bad losses. Him and the captain, he had to step up and field all those media interviews and say, oh, we'll be better than this. And, he's a captain. He's got to lead from the front and put out a 170 Supercoach. So I won't base it entirely on that. They still need to have a nice matchup. They still need to have good form. They still need to be playing at a favourable venue. But instead of maybe being my 3rd or 4th best option, they might go up to like my 1st and 2nd based on those intangibles. So, yeah, it wouldn't make me pick them like outright, but it'll give them, I guess, an unexplained data boost that I think could be coming. And the captaincy is one of them. The round 24 Brownlow, I agree, that's also one of them.
Yeah.
Even not even talking captain-wise, but you can even say the same thing for Coleman medalists in the last game, potentially. Like a Tex Walker 2 years ago, kicking 9 or 10 on West Coast, just hunting the Coleman. Things like that are an option too.
For sure. And it's like even medal games. So I know
Darcy
a couple
Parish.
of years ago, Darcy Parish is the merchant of that, but a couple of years ago, Sack Merritt was probably good buying ahead of the Dreamtime game, and I think scored about 160. And if you had him VC, the matchup was there, the narrative was there as a captain in a big game. Like, it's very easy to make narratives that are supported by data, but it's also very easy to make narratives that are based around sort of those intangible factors as well.
Yeah, I think there's both. The data's still the main thing.
Yeah, you need a mix of both.
Yeah, data's still the main thing for me, but gut feel and intangibles, I think it plays a part for sure.
Yeah.
So now, with you guys on Twitter last year putting out your captaincy videos, be honest, who's better at selecting a captain for third man up, you or Roscoe?
Oh, look, I'd love to say Roscoe here, but let's just say that. Oh, I feel bad. I want to say Roscoe. He does like a very good pod VC, even though we have the pod VC, pod C section in our sort of thread there. He does like to put a pod in the top three. Look, it varies week on week, and I don't think there's ever a week where you can get all three off your VCs and all three of your Cs right in 1 week, because something or the other happens. And so what we normally see is maybe my number one captaincy option does really well, but Ross's 2 and 3 VC options perform better. So it's really hard to predict what score you'll get out of a VC or C. It's much easier to predict when they will do well. And when they will do well can fluctuate anywhere from a 125 to a 170. Like, maybe it's a bit hard to say exactly, but if you can predict, Sack Butters is a great example. Round 2 last year against Richmond at the G. I knew he would do well. I didn't know he would do 170 well. So that sort of thing is really hard to gauge, and that's, I guess, where when we are forced to rank, like Ross, myself, and you, Pig as well, when we're forced to rank our captains from 1 to 5, I think a better way to look at it is how many of the top 5 perform well, as opposed to, my second option performed 4 points better than my first option. That means my rankings are totally incorrect. I don't think that's the fairest way to look at things. So,
yeah, I agree.
In that way, I'd say that we both do quite well.
Yep.
Just in different ways. It's probably the best way to go about it.
No, very good. I stitched you up, put you on the spot with that question there. What's your theory, or the third man up theory, about what type of player uses a VC versus who uses a C? Because my theory actually has changed on that a little bit over the last couple of years. So keen to have a chat a little bit about that.
It's so tough, isn't it, Pig? And I think when we think about a VC and a C, you can always think about a VC as your high upside, high sort of plays early in the round, high upside, who you think will be the best scorer in your team that week. But I think one thing that we fail to consider there is, in the case that player gets injured, they get a spontaneous tag. So, for instance, like Dacos against Melbourne in the King's birthday clash, the Neil Bullen tag was really late in terms of it being announced, sort of thing. So if you don't, like, I understand that was really late in the round, but if you have that happen early in the round, you just are not, it's just not known to you, and you don't have a safe fallback captain, I don't think that's the best play there. In fact, the way that I look at it may be different. The way you look at it now, Pig, is yes, the high upside VC safe floor captain is a really good metric, but the way that I now look at it is whoever I believe can get me 125, unless there is a mint matchup in that week. So Sack Butters against Richmond is a week where I would probably gamble on a higher upside VC, because I know that Sack Butters against Richmond is a really good matchup. But if there's a captaincy, there's a couple of captain options that I'm not exactly sure on, my VC will go on a player that I can bank on should get to that 125, and I don't need to worry about it, because really the VC, when you watch a game and your VC plays in it, your levels of stress are probably here. But when you're watching a game and your captain's in it, your pressure level's up here. You want to avoid that scenario as many times as possible. Where do you stand on that, in that regard, Pig?
Yeah, mine changed a little bit, because I was very much of the opinion a few years ago of your captain should be that safe fallback 120, and then you just have a ping at a 150 for a VC, Doesn't matter if they get a 70 because you've got hopefully 120 after it. I don't really think like that anymore. Now I think, because what I often found I was doing then is that I was putting the captain on who I thought would be my highest score of the round, having a ping at a VC, and then getting stuck, like having to take a 120, which I know that sounds like first world problems, but I knew or thought there was a 140 coming.
Yeah.
So I'm actually I'm actually now trying to put my VC on who I think will be the single highest scorer in my team. Like, I'll save a VC for the Sunday midday game if I need to, if I think that's going to be the highest score in my team, because I want to have the shot at being able to take that as the VC. The caveat with that is that you still need a really safe 120 fallback after them, and you need a loophole. Sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes you've got to take a different VC than you want. But yeah, I've changed a little bit where I'm saving I'm going through my team, doing my captaincy research. Who do I think will be the single highest scorer in my team? I'm trying to put the VC on that person, even if it's a Saturday night or a Sunday midday. But then, yeah, you've got to have that fallback. And there are some guys, like we said, guys like Zach Merritt that are really safe fallback captains. So as long as I've got someone to fall back on that I think can at least, give me around the 120 and I've got a loophole, I'm saving the VC to, yeah. There'll be great Thursday and Friday night VC options. Like, often last year, Dacos was one of them. And I passed on him a lot because I thought there was I thought Max Gawn was going bigger. So I saved it for Max Gawn, and often for me it worked out.
There's so much trepidation when there's a popularly owned VC on that Thursday, Friday night. And look, if you get a 135 out of your VC, but you intuitively know that there's a 140 possibly down the line, you've got two cracks of getting there. Whereas the people that got the 135 have to lock it in on the Thursday, Friday night, which isn't a bad thing. Like, 135 is great, but if you really believe that that's the case, it's just showing that you can justify that pick. I guess on that point, Pete, what do you think about like ownership in and around your rank when picking your VC and C? Because I know sometimes you can get a really good matchup in a pod, let's say a pod VC compared to a pod C. So if you've got a Lachie Neale that's owned by 5% in and around your rank, would you be comfortable to captain him if he has the matchup? Or would you rather go for a safe, more popularly owned pick in the case that if Neale fails, then you're not impacted both in rank because he's a pod, but also because he's your pod captain?
I'll be honest, I never check the ownership percentage or the amount captain percentage. Like, I don't factor it in. Yeah. I just go with who I think is going to be my highest, and I VC them as long as there's a fallback captain. So yeah, I'm not worried at all about taking on a pod or a low ownership percentage as a VC or even a C if I've done the research and if I think that they're going to go big. So I'm okay with that. I'm just thinking back. I remember round 1 last year, Max Gawn was playing Team English on a Sunday, and everyone went for a Dacos VC. I think it was a Friday or something. They got a good score. They got a 120 or maybe a 130.
Yeah.
But I was just seeing this big Gawn score coming, and he went 170, and I got that as my VC. Yeah. I mean, it takes a risk, because I was stressed that weekend. Everyone was cheering about their Dacos VC, and I kept saying, I'm just going to hold out for Gawn because I think this is one of those giant ones. Luckily enough, it was, because he played Team English and monstered him. But I mean, that's kind of the difference, I guess, I take in terms of Dacos probably would have been 60% VC'd. I don't know. I didn't look, but it would have been big.
Nah, for sure. I think agree. Look, I'll say that I was in this position a lot with Josh Dunkley at the end of last season. So he had the matchup, and but he was a pod. He was a pod around my rank, probably only 5 or 10% owned around my rank. And I did VC him a couple of times. One time I got the 140, the other time I got the 99. So it's like there's the benefits and the limitations of it. I think, though, like as we mentioned, there's so many factors that goes into picking a captain. If the differentiator is whether or not they're popularly owned or less popularly owned, I probably lean in the favour of playing that sort of conservative if everything else is in that same bracket. So I'll admit that I do look at the ownership as sort of a last metric. If everything else is, I just can't split the two of them because it's like if both of them score 130, then at least you get the points from them being a pod. You don't need to double that risk with making them your captain. That's basically the logic there.
That's fair enough. And so we've talked a bit about analysing fixture for captains and how important it is and who the team's playing, but even I guess more into that in terms of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks in a row, how much do you think we should, or how much weight do you think we should give the early fixture in selecting our starting sides? Like, I know we've gone through and looked at the fixture, and for example, even if you didn't have the bye, Nick Dacos probably has the hardest starting run I've ever seen for a midfielder. It's pretty much the 6 hardest teams in a row, whereas someone like Zach Butters or Noah Anderson has a really, really nice starting run. Do you think we should factor that in too much, or is that overthinking it?
I think that if we were to break down the players into sort of tiers, you got the premiums, you've got the mid-price, and you've got the rookies. For rookies, it's really hard to say what's a good fixture versus what's not a good fixture because, like, you really don't know their role, how many minutes they'll play, whether they'll be sub-affected. With the mid-price, I think it becomes increasingly more important because you want to hold them to their bye, but if you can cash them out early and get an upgraded premium early in the season, then that's also a plausible strategy. So someone like let's say an Ollie Hollands, if Ollie Hollands playing as a designated kicker for Carlton as a friendly fixture run, then that's all the more reason to start him in your team. But like you're saying, Pig, I think the really important thing is looking at premiums that even though you predict them to be top 8 in their line, for instance, in the midfield, like your Bont and your Sarong, if you can go without starting a day cost because of the fixture run, a really hard fixture run, that you can already start to plan an avenue to bring him in as your first upgrade of round 5, round 6, because once you get we're basing this off 2024 data, but once you go through those 6 hardest fixture runs, there's going to be the easy runs to come at some point, right? And I think that's where that logic, where if you don't start them, all of the players depreciate in price one way or another. It's almost unsustainable to maintain the price of an Uber premium like the Bont at 680k now. He probably goes into that 610 range at some point. But it's weighing up whether or not you want to play that conservative game and have him for those. I wouldn't say it's an easy fixture. You probably agree that it's probably not the easiest fixture, but we know with the Bont that he performs at a certain level regardless of the opposition, but then he has those spike scores. And if you're on the wrong end of one of those spike scores, you're not getting him for another 3 to 4 weeks down the line there.
Yeah.
So I think, for those Uber premiums, if you can nail and have a look at the fixture run to start a season, then it's quite important. When I think we're going to get to a point where we talk about some of these players, and like Noah Anderson, that fixture run, even without the bye, looks disgustingly good. And Caleb Sarong and the Freo midfielders, I'm really high on starting a Freo midfielder. 3 out of the first 5 games at Optus Stadium, and like the games that they start off with, yes, admittedly Sydney is a tough matchup, and you may say the Bulldogs can be a tough matchup, but Geelong at GMHBA, Sydney, West Coast, Bulldogs, Richmond, Melbourne, and even Adelaide to a degree, like that's a really good start to a season for a midfield core group.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm actually putting a fair bit of weight into the early fixture in terms of my starting team this year, and also helping differentiate, if you're splitting hairs between 2 picks. So like, let's say you're considering Zach Butters or you're considering someone else at the same price. Zach Butters is early, really easy run. I actually could see him averaging 130, maintaining his average or his price. And the other player, say, might come down to 580, so then you could get them a bit cheaper. I mean, if we even look at the rucks, like Tristan Cherry's, he has a great first matchup against English, but then it's really hard. So I actually could see him dropping below 600k, by about round 6 or 7, and then you could get him that much cheaper. And we've been talking a little about it a bit in Slack. Like, do you wait for them to come down? Do you just get a placeholder? Say someone not that amazing like Jordan Sweet that can hold the fort for 6 weeks, maybe make you 60, 70, 80k. Because if Jordan Sweet makes you 60 and Cherry comes down 80, that's actually a 140k win. Obviously, you're using a trade to do it, but that's where I'm kind of thinking the early fixture is really important. And someone like you said, Sarong, I'm actually not sure he does drop with that early fixture for a bit, or it might take a while for him to drop. And I mean, there's the same with the Gold Coast boys and even the GWS guys to a lesser extent. Yes, they've got the bye, but there's also some great matchups. Gold Coast and Carlton are the two that play Richmond, North, and West Coast in their first 6. So, you could be looking at if you're splitting hairs between, a Sam Walsh and, I don't know, someone else maybe Sam Walsh is not a good example, come back from a hamstring.
Sam Walsh and LDU. Like, in that case, yeah.
Maybe that could be a differentiator, just because if LDU's got a tough run, which I actually can't remember North's run, so don't hold me to that. But, for example, if he did have a tough midfield run, you could potentially see him going down even. But, yeah, it's interesting. I think it's definitely worth considering. Maybe enough people don't consider it. I also think once you get to about round 5 or round 6, you're starting to do your first upgrades. Upgrade season's kicking in. So then you can actually pick who you want, and you can pick who has a really good fixture coming up. And then your captain options start getting better and better and better. Whereas your first 5 rounds, you're probably not making upgrades. You're probably stuck with those primos for 5 rounds. So you actually want those primos to be captain options most weeks. And someone like Butters, someone like Sarong, I was going to say Marshall before he got injured. He had a nice run, but I wouldn't be going there now. Guys like that. TDK, if he's solo ruck, there's some really nice fixtures. So I actually really do consider the fixtures, especially for the first 5 rounds. And then once it gets to 6, 7, 8, 9, you're starting to do upgrades, and that's when you can start to bring in Bont if you haven't started him, or start to bring in Cherry if you haven't started him, things like that.
The other thing with that as well is about round 5 to 6, you can probably start to pick up on trends for the 2025 season. So right now, as we were mentioning, like all the fixture data we're talking about is based off of what last year looked like. But something that when another article which we have in the season guide is you and I, we break down the top 4 mids at each club and sort of the implications in terms of the centre bounce appearances sort of thing. Like, how will the Adelaide midfield look defensively now that they've added in Peatling, now that they're probably going to possibly move Laird out of there? Like, how does it all look will be a big story. GWS, on the other hand, like when Peatling isn't in there, will they be a restricted matchup? Will they not be a restricted matchup? These are all questions which we can find the answers for in that first 5-week block, but right now we're just basing this off of what we know from 2024 and what we may come to know in the practice matches and preseason games, as well as round 0 as well. But just very quickly on that, like we picked up very early in round 0 last year that Richmond was going to be an easy midfield matchup. The way Gold Coast played them, we were wondering, can 4 mids average 100? And I think all 4 of them scored 115 plus or something, and it was just like, Richmond is not very good in the midfield. So that's something we can look at this year in round 0 as well.
Yeah, for sure, round 0. But I think what you've said about round 2024 data is absolutely correct. It's all we have. I mean, we have to go on it. So, but take it fairly well, but take it with a little bit of grain of salt. Like, I do think there's going to be some changes. Like, if we look at it now, if you look at the DFS data, it says Melbourne are a very, very easy midfield matchup. I actually think with a healthy Gawn, Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, I reckon they're going to be back to being fairly tough. That's just my gut feeling. Essendon are another one. Essendon are actually rated as the hardest ruck matchup in the league. I don't think Goldstein's going to play, and it looks like Nick Bryan's going to get a lot of games. And as like a young lumbering giraffe, I'm not sure how restrictive he'll be. So there will be changes, is what I'm saying. 24 data. I think it's still great. It's what we got to use, but there will be some changes. Just try and put a bit of an intuition lens over it. Maybe Goldstein won't be there to restrict your ruckman, and Bryan won't stop him.
Another great example is with West Coast rucks as well. Like, I think West Coast, I don't have the exact data, but I think that they were the easiest ruck matchup by a fair way last year, but that was with Bailey Williams, and right now Matt Flynn and Williams are on a sort of 50-50 in terms of who's going to be the team A ruck. If it's Flynn, you probably see that number regress towards the mean more than go away, because I think you did some great data that Flynn's ruck percentage, hit out sort of win percentage is close to 50%, whereas Williams is in about the mid-30s, which is just a really big difference and will contribute a great deal to that DVP, defensive versus position data.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, I mean, use the 2024 data. We have to
Yep.
take it with a grain of salt, but
Yep.
I think we've summarised well there that I think you've got to consider the early fixture for your starting picks, and especially because you can kind of in a way predict who's going to go up and who's going to go down. Maybe not super accurately, but at least give you an indication, and then that can give you trade targets starting up grade season.
Awesome.
So now a question from our Slack community for you, Janath. What is one player that you would love to start, but you don't have the guts to?
You mentioned a bit earlier, Pig, the player that I would love to start but don't have the guts to is Noah Anderson.
Yeah.
There's a couple of reasons for this. So I'll start off with the positives for Anderson, and really, I think everyone sort of knows that Anderson, just when he was playing at home, he was just like ridiculous. I think when I've got let me just get that exact. So he averaged 131.8 in 9 games at People's First Stadium, whereas he only averaged 90.6 in the remaining 14 games. So that's a difference of 40 points right there. As the captain, this is where that intangible side of things comes in. I just don't think that as a captain you can be as much of a downhill skier, playing really well at home and then quite poorly to average away. And so if we can see that 90.6 regress up a little bit to where his average currently is, but he can maintain or at least come down just a tad bit in that home average, we can see him push into that upper echelon of midfielders for SuperCoach. And then on top of that, I think what really tempts me, and he may be tempting you as well, is that early fixture run. As you were mentioning before, West Coast, round 1. Melbourne in round 3 is a bit of a tough one, straight after the bye, possibly. Same with Adelaide, we just don't know, but that again is at People First Stadium. North Melbourne in Gather Round, Richmond at Marvel. That opening fixture run is just something that, as a Gold Coast mid, he should be entrenched in that midfield as well. Quite possibly undervalued at 575k, and we just know what ceiling that he can possess. I think that Anderson is one of those players which, feel free to disagree here, Pig, but it's very easy to predict when he will go really well, and really easy to predict when he may not go as well.
Yeah,
and so,
100%.
like, when I'm picking a captain, I either have Anderson in there because I know he's going to do really well, but I've never put Anderson in there speculating he'll do well, because normally that correlation is quite positive in terms of when you think he'll do well, and then he actually does well. I'll ask that from you, Pig, as well. What's sort of, firstly, you can add to that Anderson discussion, but then who's one player that you want to pick but you don't have the guts to?
Well, Anderson's a great one because I actually discussed him in episode 2. He was the player I brought to the table to have a chat with Mini Monk about, and the fixture was a big part of it. I agree. Being a captain, he should hopefully be more consistent. Even if he just, like you said, brings his away average up a bit. He's someone that I could definitely see going 110 over the season potentially, but he's it's hard to predict. But also, you got to have a bit of fun as well. I feel like he's one of those fun picks. I mean, some owners definitely that had him last year will say he wasn't fun because he was giving them 50s at times as a premium mid. But yeah, he's a great one. He is someone that I'm and ahhing with. He might even be my don't have the guts to go with. I am heavily considering starting someone from this buy, whether it's him, Tom Green, Lachie Whitfield, even Kieran Briggs. If Kieran Briggs is healthy, I think he's got upside. So I think as we go through, we might have a chat about what you think about how many of those you can start, if any. Yeah. But yeah, any of those 4 on that buy. I'm probably not as interested in Flanders at his elevated price, but those underpriced guys, I think they've all been in my team in the last week or two, just in a rotating door with that kind of last spot. But I'll probably only take one of them from that buy. So yeah, Tom Green at the moment is probably the one that I really want to start that I'm not quite. And it'll be interesting. We've got a chat about Lachie Whitfield coming up, and I had Tom Green in, and I've just moved him out for Lachie Whitfield after we're doing a bit of research as well. So we'll see how we go.
So Tom Green is one of those players that I currently have him ranked 6th in my sort of predicted top 8 mids for the season.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't see how he regresses from last season because he's got the 5 in that score. The only way I really can see is that his average goes up. So with that 5 in his score is probably quite underpriced to what he can actually perform. And 574 200's right in that, it's in $700 away from Noah Anderson, but
yeah,
it's like you mentioned, it's probably because you probably want to start one of Whitfield, Green, Anderson. It's going to be a really tough call to split between the two, because it's not like the situation where Sydney, Collingwood, Geelong, and Brisbane share that same bye. So it's a much nicer early season bye, albeit in the second week of the Supercoach season.
All right, so we've just talked a little bit about round zero players, so it's a good little segue. So we're now going to put our money where our mouth is. We've just had a chat about what we think makes going into picking a good captain, how important the fixture is. So you and I are going to go through and name who we think the top 5 scorers are going to be in round zero. And now that obviously doesn't matter for Supercoach in terms of points on field. It does matter for their price changes. So these guys, we think these 5 guys will get a big kickstart on their cash generation, or maybe get out of hand of price or whatnot. But so I've asked you to go away, do a little bit of research into if you were doing a captaincy article for round zero, who would your top 5 be? And maybe we'll just like have a sentence or two on each one, why we think that that's the case, and explain our rationale. But who have you got at 5? And then I'll say who I've got at 5.
Can I start with the honourable mentions?
Yeah, go on.
All right, so I've got 2 honourable mentions, and that's Nick Martin and Max Holmes. So with both of them, the reason why they didn't make it into my top 5 is I've just got a bit of speculation, or not so sure about their roles compared to the top 5 that I do have in. Nick Martin, I think, will playing with what they're playing. Sorry, they're playing Gold Coast, right? So I should know this. Yes, playing Gold Coast. Gold Coast were one of the easier midfield matchups last year, especially near the end of the season. So I think that's a matchup to target, but also you just don't know if he'll be lining up on the wing, playing at half forward. He's a really good player. So I think in that regard is a bit hard to gauge. And the other one's Max Holmes. So Max Holmes is they're playing Brisbane. It's at the Gabba. The reason why I have him situated there is I know that he was playing really well in the matchup against Brisbane in the preliminary final before getting injured. So just a little bit of a gut feel there more than anything. Probably not so much data based in terms of the defense versus position data, but that's where I was going there. And so I'll go to my number 5 now, which is Lachie Neale. So with Brisbane playing against Geelong in the first game of the season, I wanted to put a Brisbane midfield in here, and I was in and ahhing whether that's going to be Neale, Dunkley, McCluggage, even Ashcroft. But I've settled for Lachie Neale just for the fact, playing at the Gabba, first game of the season, I think that Brisbane want to kickstart their premiership campaign off in the right premiership sort of
defense.
Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. Defense off in the right way, and who better than the captain to do so? And average 119 last year. There's Geelong this is another one of those things with the change in their midfield matchup. Will Tom Stewart sort of still be in that centre bounces? When we were going through our midfield mixes for the season, it was just another one of those teams that it's just so hard to predict who's going to be in that midfield makeup. So that's why I've slotted Neale in there. Who do you have at number 5, Pig?
Well, for my honourable mentions, I'm actually going to give Lachie Neale an honourable mention and a just miss out. And for me, that's mainly based around that I believe he's carrying a bit of an injury at the minute and not full training. So I'm not sure I'd just yeet straight into someone round zero without a full pre-season. But, I mean, he's right up there. My other honourable mention actually is Darcy Cameron coming up against Kieran Briggs, a ruckman that tends to give up a lot of points, doesn't win many hitouts. Darcy Cameron had a great year last year and probably flying under some people's radars. Probably fair enough. He's not necessarily a great starting pick with an early bye, but I actually think he could do really well against Kieran Briggs and make a few people go, that's not a bad score. And then my number 5, I'm going to start with Zach Merritt. So Gold Coast were one of the easiest matchups for inside mids in 2024, like you said when you were talking about Nick Martin. I do expect Gold Coast to be better this year, but Zach's just such a top-tier talent. He'll want to captain his team to a winning opening round as well. There's that side of it. So I think Zach Merritt's going to be a pretty good, solid start in round zero. Who are we going to now?
Before I've gone with Tom Green from the Geno List Giants coming up against Collingwood. Now, Green did start off the season quite well last season in the same matchup against Collingwood. The only difference is when we consider the two things is actually a free agent signing from the Giants to Collingwood. So Harry Perriman, what exact role will he play in the Collingwood midfield mix? Does he play more of that negating role? Will he have a completely different role to what he played at the Giants, which was playing as more of the pseudo halfback, sort of come to the back of stoppages sort of play? It was just a utility, really, but it'll be really interesting to see what his role looks like. I just think that Tom Green, again, typically starts seasons off quite well, has a good matchup against Collingwood, and so that's why I've got him in at number 4. Who do you have, Pig?
My number 4 is Noah Anderson. Essendon were an easy matchup for inside mids last year. Essendon were falling apart towards the end of last year, and teams were just rolling over the top of them. I don't expect that to be the case. I expected them to, they've had a whole preseason off. I expect them to be better. But, I mean, as you said earlier, Noah Anderson averaged over 130 at home last year. So this is just one of those matchups where you said it's easy to predict how Anderson scores. And I think this is one of those ones where it's easy to predict. He's at home. He's against a weaker midfield. Could go very big.
First game as captain, everything sort of starts.
There's a few things lining up there.
Yeah.
Who are we going next?
Well, you've already said my number 3, Zach Merritt. So for all the reasons that you mentioned, the easy matchup against Gold Coast, when we think about that, he's the captain. Yes, they've been given sort of, I don't know if it's a privilege or an opportunity playing round 0. I think that whether or not he plays, now this is something which I was listening to the coaches panel a bit earlier today, and they were talking or floating the idea that Merritt might be going or training a little bit as a distributor of halfback. And so that role speculation, I can't see a world where he isn't Essendon's number 1 midfielder just because he's that good. And it would probably be more ditches like Robin Peter to Paul. They don't really need another halfback in the mould off they've got Dylan Shield training down there. I think Zach Merritt's got a really good matchup in round 0 against Gold Coast, and they don't really tag. We didn't really see with Dimmer Hardwick, so I think Merritt should be a safe top 3 round 0 scorer.
Yeah, and
you're number 3.
You said we've stolen some of each other's picks, but I actually think that's going to happen a bit because there's only 4 teams playing, so we're probably going to have a very similar top 5. But also
that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. It means it gives us more confidence. My number 3 is actually someone I think you've missed here. He's probably the only one that I haven't seen pop up, is Brodie Grundy. So Brodie Grundy dominates at the MCG. It's a smaller ground, much smaller dimensions. There's a lot more stoppages. His splits 4 and away were huge, and he loves the SCG. Coming up against Lloyd Meek, who wasn't a tough opponent at all in 2024. Actually, it's quite easy at times. The Hawthorn training reports say Ned Reeves has actually been doing quite well. So if Reeves plays, I'm going to change my mind. We're doing this research, recording it a month before round 0, so who knows what happens. But if it's Meek versus Grundy at the SCG, I think it's a top 3 score of the round.
No, that's fair enough. I did consider Brodie Grundy, and there was a couple of reasons why I have a little bit of trepidation about how he'll score. The first one being is that the Hawthorn midfield is very good. So we've got Newcomb, you have the neutraliser there in Connor Nash, Will Day, and then you got your Josh Ward, Cam McKenzie pushing up in there as well as James Warple. So I think in terms of midfield matchup, we may not see with Brodie Grundy, a lot of his scoring can come from hit-outs to advantage as well. So that's one of the things where I sort of worry. It's more so when we're thinking about Meek last year, Hawthorn probably did take a while to sort of acclimatise, but like you're saying, as we're looking at the last 5 to 10 weeks, that's when Hawthorn were performing well, and Meek was quite an easy matchup. I just think that now that they've had another pre-season under their belt together, the whole midfield Will Day is in there. I just don't see that everything will be easy for Grundy, but that MCG matchup, as you mentioned, is he loves playing there. Loved playing there when he was at Collingwood and loved playing there last year as well. So we'll see how things goes. It's not one that wasn't under consideration, though. Definitely.
Yeah, no, very good. I think your little spiel there just gave a bit of a overview of into all the myriad of things we think about with our captaincy options. Like, you're thinking about Brodie Grundy might not score amazing because Hawthorn have a good midfield. A lot of people will say, well, what's the correlation with that? But yeah, there's a lot of things that go into the thinking. But get us home with number 2. And I reckon they're probably similar, our last few anyway, or at least different orders.
Yeah, no. So I've got Lachie Whitfield, who we'll talk about in a bit more detail coming up as my number 2, and the first major reason being is that playing at NG Stadium, home ground, Lachie Whitfield is just, as we saw at the back end of last season, his average, I think he averaged, let me get this right, I think he averaged 121.8 in the last 12 home and away games to end 2024. So he's in that form now with the departure of Cumming and Perriman, particularly playing in that defence. The distribution role should be all the more. I don't have the exact behinds per game on me right now, but I'm pretty sure that Collingwood ranked in the top half in terms of the amount of behinds that they scored last season, which should just give even more confidence in that Whitfield should have more kick-ins, and he did lead the league in kick-ins last year as well, so if there's anyone that loves a kick-in, it is Whitfield. That just, I think in the last 10 games last year, Collingwood were the second easiest matchup for designated kickers, only behind Gold Coast, which is the reason why I put Nick Martin and Zach Merritt as either honourable mentions or in this top 5. So I think Lachie Whitfield, based off last year and now building into this season as the main lead of the Orange Tsunami, should be a great pick, and that's why I have him at number 2.
I've also got Lachie Whitfield at number 2. My description, as you said, Collingwood were a very easy matchup for designated kickers last year, and Whitfield kind of just did what he wanted. He averaged over 120 post-bye, and I just don't see a reason for either of those things changing, so why not lock him in? Then your number 1?
My number 1 is a player that you mentioned already. It's Noah Anderson. So, like you were mentioning, and we talked about before, the type of players you can predict will score well based off a matchup. I think Anderson is right at the top of that list. Playing at home, round 0, new captain, playing a weaker midfield. Like, they've got Caldwell, they got Durham in there, but I don't see the defensive element in that midfield per se to sort of be able to neutralise Anderson in a game like this. And I think that Anderson, this is always the tough part, because we're basically doing what we do with captains, but in picking the 5, because you can see all 5 doing well, but it's just discerning the order in which they do well is the tough part. So I don't exactly know what Anderson will score, but if I was to put a sort of pin the tail on a donkey in a way, I'd probably say it's a 135 to 140 is the way that I'm feeling with Anderson, and based off the data that you mentioned as well, that's why I've got him at number 1, because I think if you had to put all the players in round 0 into a pot and say who's going to score the most, I feel that's going to be Noah Anderson.
Yeah, and like I said, I've got him at number 4, so I also think he's going to score really well. Like, 4 of our top 5 are all the same. It's just Neil and Grundy are the differences. Because my number 1 player, who, if you said who's going to be the highest scorer of round 1, I think round 0, I think it could be Tom Green.
Yeah.
Like, Collingwood were an easy matchup for inside midfielders last year. They haven't really changed personnel much. They do have Harry Perryman coming in. I don't really know what kind of role he's going to play. Maybe he will be a bit more defensive, but yet to be seen. Hopefully they've got a healthier De Goey and whoever else can run through there. I don't think Tom Mitchell's going to be there. I saw him in a moon boot not that long ago, so who knows. But I just think Collingwood's midfield is very similar. Tom Green is very similar. I mean, he's lost a couple of players, like you said, out of that midfield, so he might even have to do more. I think Tom Green could absolutely come out of round 0 going bananas, and then as could Noah Anderson, as could Lachie Whitfield, as could Zach Merritt, Brodie Gundy, Lachie Neale. All these 6 we mentioned, we've got them all essentially in our top 6, just in different orders.
But it's a lot of confidence knowing that we're on the same page. I remember last year when we did this exercise for the captains as well last year, I think we were very, very similar. There was just obviously the order is the part where it's just, there's a lot of gut feeling there, but having the players in there is a lot of confidence. And I guess one thing on that Tom Green pick that we probably haven't talked about is the impact now that Toby Bedford will probably tag Nick Dacos for the first time in their respective careers. So I don't think Bedford's gone to Dacos before. And how that may positively impact Green in terms of clearing more path for him to get the ball, more of those ground ball gets, contested ground ball gets, handballs, possibly may play a big role into giving a good score to start off the season.
Yeah, no, so I think that's a pretty good exercise in terms of people aren't obviously going to get these scores for round 0 because it doesn't have a super coach, but hopefully it's just given people some insight into our thinkings and how we go about picking captains and what we're really considering or what we don't really consider, both the data and the stats, but then also some of the intangibles. So I think it's kind of opened up a little bit, our brains a little bit to the community. So, I mean, we can check back in a month's time and see how our 5 guys went. I remember last year we did the same exercise. I beat you, but that was only because Tom Stewart got injured like on a 30. So apart from that score, we were so even. So let's have another go at it again.
We'll do it. We'll do that. And the best part about SuperCoach is probably going to be Shannon Neal scoring 150 in round 0 or something and screwing us all over.
I nearly suggested Oscar McInerney if he's coming up against Sam de Koning or something like that. Could be something random like that.
For sure, Pig. It was a great exercise.
Great. So now we'll finish up the episode by talking about 2 players. We're both going to bring one to the table. And we've already mentioned this guy's name about 50 times this episode. But the player you want to bring up is who? And why?
I want to bring up Lachie Whitfield because he is the player from those early buys that I really want to start. And so he's currently in my team. And I would love to get your perspective on this pick as well, saying that you were talking about the fact that you have him in your team as well, Pig. So Whitfield, priced at 111, but as we mentioned before, his post-buy scores were as following: 108, 134, 105, 117, 107, and then he gets really good. 113, 137, 133, 152, 97, 106, and then that 153 against the Bulldogs at Ballarat 10 of the season. Like, that's the consistency that you would want from your D1 any day of the week. I think a lot of coaches at the moment are sort of a bit worried about starting Whitfield. Not so much about the injury factor, but he's currently only 11% owned, and I think the big reason for that is the buy. So if he didn't have the buy, what do you reckon his ownership percentage would be at the moment?
I think it should be a lot higher. Like, I think it should be 30 or 40% even more. Like, people are worried. There does seem to be this consensus that everyone wants a safe D1. Like, people don't want someone like a Wangani Malia or a Jordan Clark or a Bailey Dale at D1. They want someone they consider bigger. And a lot of people are going with Sheasel. I've seen a couple of like Luke Ryans, things like that. But I actually think Lachie Whitfield could be the D1, and he also could be the highest averaging defender of the year. Period. Like, as you said, he averaged over 123 post-buy last year, and you can get him at under 600k. One of the big boosts for him that I saw was that it came from kick-ins. Like, in 2022, he only took 1% of GWs as kick-ins. The year after 2023, he took 35% of their kick-ins. Last year, that skyrocketed to 53% of the team's kick-ins. And like you said, essentially took the most kick-ins in the league, 159 kick-ins for the season. So it's no surprise then that he averages an extra 2.5 kicks a game. And probably he improved his disposal efficiency up by 5 percentage points. Maybe that's just those really easy kicks coming out of the goal square that often, like, rarely get chopped off or they go long down the line. So
his disposal efficiency is quite good as well. Like, I know there's been times when I've owned Whitfield in the past and he's been a complete butcher. But one thing that we saw, the more and more that he played in that role, and I think this goes sort of for as just a general rule of thumb, is that a midfield or player that's in a contested role, when they go into more of an uncontested role, it can actually take a bit of a while to acclimatise to the lack of pressure that you have, which sounds a bit counterintuitive, but we saw that last year with Nick Martin. Like, he's moving from, yes, he was playing the wing, but he was also playing in and around the ball. But now when you move behind the ball, you just rush your kicks because you don't realise how much time you actually have. And one of the things which we'll talk about when we talk about your player or players, Pig, is with someone like an Ollie Hollands this year as well. Moving from the wing, in and around the ball to behind the ball, he may have periods of time where he's rushing kicks and kicking it to the other team, but I think we just got to work through that. We saw that last year with Whitfield at the start of the season. Some of his poor scores came not because he didn't get the ball, but because he didn't dispose of it well. But at the back end of the season, he really picked up on that. I've got a stat for you, mate.
Go on, hit me.
And yes, there's only 8 total kick-ins which are vacated by the departures of Perriman with 7 and Cumming with 1 from last year. But here's the stats. So, SuperCoach difference playing with and without Perriman coming from last year. So, for Perriman, the difference wasn't as big. So, with Perriman in 19 games, Whitfield averaged 110.4. compared to 113.8 in the games without. So a positive correlation there. With Cumming, it was quite interesting, and I didn't actually know what to make of this, and if there's really any reason for this, I'm just going to double take it because it's just one of those stats where you're like, so Whitfield and Cumming played 4 games together last year, and when we look at what the difference was, so when he was playing with Cumming, he averaged 118.5 in SuperCoach against 109.4 without him. But the big difference came in Dream Team. So I know Dream Team sort of rewards probably less on efficiency and more on volume of marks, points. He averaged 136 in the 4 games with Cumming compared to 107 in the 19 games without him. Small sample size, yes, but when we think about volume of ball, is there any reason for why Cumming playing actually helps Whitfield, and what ramifications may that have this year?
Yeah, that is very, very interesting. I wouldn't have thought that would be the case. I thought it'd go the other way, but was Cumming playing more of a lockdown role in those games and allowed Whitfield to just roam everywhere and do what he wanted, maybe? I think taking too much out of a 4-game sample size could be a little bit deceptive. But yeah, it's interesting. It'd be interesting to see. I mean, I guess you could put it there as a little beige-coloured flag. As why would this happen? I don't have an answer for you. I don't know, but it's an interesting one, and we'll see if it continues.
Yeah. And then I guess the last thing that I sort of want to bring to the table with regards to Whitfield, apart from the bye, so he's got the round 2 bye with Gold Coast, and then he's got the round 16 bye, which he shares with Brisbane, Essendon, Geelong. Yes, there are some other popular defenders amongst them, so you got your Dane Zorko, Kadeem Coleman. For those that want to go there, Jordan Ridley, Nick Martin, Tom Stewart, Max Holmes. So it's not a bye. That mid-season bye probably scares me more than the early season bye, because I imagine that we'll want some of those players, possibly, especially like a Max Holmes who may be breaking out this season. But what I wanted to mention was the double-up opponents that Whitfield has this season. So obviously they got the Battle of the Bridge, the Sydney matchup. Now, whether James Jordan is employed as a tag under Dean Cox is yet to be seen. It's going to be something which we can sort of analyse, and I think that's really good that we get to see that in round 0. It may be something that we can take into consideration with Whitfield. Does Jordan still play as a forward tagger? And then you got Geelong, the Bulldogs, Gold Coast and West Coast. So I think off those 5 double-up matchups, West Coast should be a good double-up matchup in terms of the fact that I don't expect them not to finish bottom 4 this year. And then you've got Gold Coast and Bulldogs, who are both top 3 easy matchups for designated kickers to end last season. And we saw Whitfield, yes, they were playing in Ballarat in sort of these windy conditions, but his 2 scores last year against the Bulldogs were 112, 31 touches, and 153, 42 touches. His 2 scores against Gold Coast in 2024 was 87, 29 touches, 137, 42 touches. 137, 40 touches. And West Coast, 124, 36 touches. So against those 3 opposition, who we suspect to be easy oppositions this year, again, he did perform well last year. Whereas Geelong, 69 points, 27 touches. But that goes to show we were sort of talking about how he took a while to acclimatise into just this role of being a pure distributor. He had the touches, but he didn't have the efficiency. And then, as we know, he was probably in that sort of below average to average scores against Sydney in the 3 matchups they had last year, 54, 105, 100. So if we're worried about the double-up matchups, I think that's something which we can sort of ease off a little bit until we at least see what Sydney do with James Jordan in round 0 before we have to lock in our starting teams.
I think Lachie Whitfield could be a great starting pick, and I still think that there's some upside, as you said, at some point. The question for me, obviously, and a lot of listeners will be, what about the early bye? What do you think about the early bye? And we've obviously also talked up Noah Anderson and Tom Green. I kind of mentioned Kieran Briggs a little bit if he's healthy, but is 2 of them too many? Is 1 of them okay, or is none better?
I mean, it all goes down to the team, right? Because let's say that you aren't starting at Whitfield. Who are the players that you're likely to start in his place? You're probably considering, I don't know what a lot of teams look like, but the main players I've sort of seen floated in the D1, D2 spot is Sheasel, Sinclair, Clark, Wangani, Jordan Clark, Wangani, Malera, Luke Ryan. So those Freo and Saints boys are probably safer because they only share the mid-season bye with each other. But if you're coming down a position between, do you start Lachie Whitfield or Harry Sheasley, you've got to consider that, okay, maybe Whitfield does have... Sheasley's probably not the best example because, I mean, he is the most expensive defender, but he plays just a premium role in the midfield for North. But just when we're thinking about it, if you're looking at a North Melbourne player, for instance, they share a really tough mid-season bye with Carlton, Western Bulldogs, and Port Adelaide. Yeah. And so a lot of teams that are going around, when you think about Bontempelli, Butters, Cherry, Horne-Francis, Caleb Daniel, and then your Sheasel, Tom De Koning, there's a lot of really popular picks in that bye. So you've got to consider, okay, in best 18 in the early bye rounds, is it worth going for Lachie Whitfield, knowing that the bye that they have in the mid-season is probably going to be easier for me to navigate than, for instance, the bye that is shared, the first mid-season bye with North Melbourne and the other teams that I mentioned. So I personally think that having one premium from that round 2 bye with GWS and Gold Coast is totally fine, because you should still have enough players. You should realistically have 23 players to field in that early bye round. And yes, you may see a slight dip at the top end of maybe 30, 40 points you're losing between starting Whitfield and then having to play rookie on field that week. But those are points which you'll make up over the course of the year if you believe that Whitfield is D1, D2 potential. So I think that's enough justification there to be able to start a Whitfield like that. Especially if, like when we talk about, if you listen to us, then you should be able to make 30 to 40 weeks over the course of the year from captaincy decisions alone.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we get tooting our own horn too much.
Yeah, that's right. But I agree that starting one, I think, should be fine. It is annoying that, it is so early in the season, literally round 2, but I think starting one's fine. Now, if we go on to the player I want to bring to the table, is someone that won't be playing this year in Nick Newman. I know you're a Blues fan. Everyone can see your background. It's just full of Carlton memorabilia. So Nick Newman, what's happening in that defender role, do you think? We've seen a lot of Ollie Hollands chat in pre-season. He moved from the wing to the back line at the end of last year. I believe he played 4 games in the back line. He averaged 94 SuperCoach over that final month. So now he's had all pre-season to train there. Even before the Nick Newman injury, looked like he was going to be playing in that back 6. He is midfield eligible, should get defender DPP after round 6. Bit of an awkward price bracket. But I think if someone like Ollie Hollands can average 90, make you a little bit of a cash, keep a rookie off field, wait for someone more expensive like a Bont to come down, and then the price gap narrows, I think that's a win. So I guess my question for you, is it Ollie Hollands taking that Nick Newman role, or will it be a bit more of a committee like Sard and McGovern getting a bit of a boost as well potentially? Or what do you think about the Nick Newman role and Ollie Hollands?
It's really interesting, Pig, and the reason why I say that is because Hollands is probably the one that stands out, and even looking at the intra-club footage, from yesterday, Carlton had a sort of a scratch match. I mean, Hollands was playing exclusively as a distributor off halfback, pushing into that sort of central portion of the ground when going forward with the ball. And Sam Docherty was playing purely in the midfield / on the wing. So that in itself is a big tick to Hollands, because if you were thinking, okay, Newman gets injured, who are the players that are likely to go back? You would have probably gone Docherty or Hollands, and I think that's a big tick for Hollands in that regard. Albeit Adam Cherham missed yesterday's intra-club for his wedding. But I still think that Docherty is going to be angling towards playing wing or in the midfield, as he mentioned a couple of days ago on the podcast, which was released on the Carlton website as well. The back 7 for Carlton is really hard to predict, and that's I guess the tricky part to all this until we see what the practice matches looks like. See, Weathering's a lock in there, Sard's a lock, and then in terms of the other players, there's Lockie Cowan is a player that I rate really highly, and I think he's locked in along with Ollie Hollands. And then you've got a mismatch. Do you go with Tuoff Haynes, Jack Silvani has been training down, there's another sort of intercepting defender, or Mitch McGovern, or do you start all 3 of them? So that's the tough part, which I think we'll be able to figure out as in these next couple of weeks. But if we were to look at a back 7 of those players, then Weathering, McGovern trained with the Bees yesterday, Team B. So Is he even best 22 anymore? I think the distributor role, and Carlton have sort of, in years gone by, that haven't really had one single distributor. So Newman, yes, he's been a distributor, but we always see Adam Sard, Mitch McGovern take kick-ins. So we don't have a single kick-in distributor like a Lachie Whitfield at the Giants. So I think that Ollie Hollands will probably, if he does get the role, not be solely reliant on kick-ins, but maybe we might be looking at 333k. I think he's a very solid pick as who should be the main distributor for Carlton, but I wouldn't say he's going to be the main kick-in taker because we've never done a main kick-in take in that way since Sam Doherty's moved out of the halfback line.
Yeah, potentially a bit like Essendon where there's probably 5 different guys taking kick-ins at every time. So I guess one of the questions do you think one of the questions on him has been his disposal efficiency as well and his kicking. Even his brother Elijah made a joke that he's going to be a really good fantasy asset and not good in SuperCoach because he can't kick. And what you said about people moving from the midfield to the back line, like Lachie Whitfield, and taking a while to get used to that kicking. I mean, we saw that with Nick Newman last year. He butchered a lot at the start. I'm wondering whether that'll happen with Ollie Hollands, but also, does it really matter that much? Would you be fairly confident he could be kind of a 90 average guy back if he's playing defence?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because if we compared to a Nick Martin, starting at an elevated price, he sort of had to come out of the blocks firing. Whereas with an Ollie Hollands priced at 333k, he probably has the time afforded to him in a buffer if we're not sort of being very reactive. And so last year, I know going to a couple of games, a lot of Carlton fans sort of had Ollie as a bit of a whipping boy in terms of his distribution, playing on the wing. When he looks to take the 45, he turns it over, and it's just a momentum killer in that way. But I think now that in those last 4 games, as you mentioned, Pig, averaging 94, having a full preseason in that role, I think he should be able to acclimatise fairly quickly into the role. And then, yes, 333k. 85 is quite plausible. He would be priced at 62, so 85 to 90 gets him that sort of 120k if he can average that consistently. And playing Richmond in the first round, and then West Coast North in the first 6 rounds, Collingwood as well. So Richmond round 1, Collingwood round 4, West Coast round 5, North Melbourne round 6. That's a really good start for a designated kicker, especially if Carlton should be winning quite a few games to start this season.
Yeah. Ollie's been in my team for a while, for a few weeks now, and
same here.
There's been getting a bit more buzz about him as people are seeing him on the track playing that half back, but I think we'll just see how it goes throughout the preseason, but definitely something I wanted to chat about and get your vibe on.
I guess the other thing there is with Adam Sard, since he's come to the club, I don't know what it is, but we really haven't unleashed him in the role that he had at Essendon, just a free run and gun. He's just been a lockdown small defender. And look, I don't know what it is. Maybe he does get a bit more run and carry this year. I know Carlton fans, when we go to games, you hear the woof or whatever kick that he does, really. But I would like to see a bit more run and carry from Sard, but I don't think that should negatively impact Hollands because we saw just how much distribution went through Newman last year, particularly at the end of last season.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good summary.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for your time, Janath. Now, what have you guys got going on in the off-season? I know the SuperCoach Salt League, there's a lot going on. You guys are pretty busy. So do you want to tell everyone about, A, the podcast, B, the Third Man Up Twitter, and then the season guide as well?
Nah, thank you. And yeah, look, the question is probably what's not going on, because there's a lot going on at SuperCoach Swordplay. I guess we'll just start off with the channel itself. So we've sort of SuperCoach with DR's channel sort of had a bit of a rebrand over the off season. It's now SuperCoach Swordplay on YouTube. We're looking to do a wide variety of content. So we have our weekly review in terms of the weekly podcast. We have a talkback show now on weekends as well, where you can sort of dial in and just go on rants and vent about SuperCoach, a bit of like SEN but for SuperCoach, Call of Dueno. And then we have sort of team reveals in this pre-season leading up. We'll also have a variety of a captain's video this year. So last year we would sort of on Third Man Up, but I think it's quite good for viewers like what you're doing at Dr. Supercoach Pig is quite novel, and I think it'd be great for the viewers to get a couple of perspectives there as well, just on top of the review, the thread which we put out on Third Man Up. And then on Third Man Ups, we'll still have the Captain's Corner, the Rookie Data Dump, we'll have Pyramids of Hierarchy, so just all the content which we've been doing as well. So there's a bit of an alignment between Supercoach Swordplay on YouTube and Third Man Up on Twitter. It's basically one under the one umbrella, and together we've, along with many content creators like yourself, mate, we've put together this off-season a Supercoach Swordplay season guide. So that's like the AFL prospectus back in the day for Supercoach. And hopefully now that we've got all the content together, it should be released in the next couple of weeks. We're aiming at 21st of February for the release. Pig, you have a special discount code which you can give to the viewers as well for 10% off the pre-order, if you wanted to give a bit of a shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this Supercoach Swordplay season guide is going to be, I haven't seen how long it's going to be, but it is going to be huge. It's going to have so much super content out there. You can read it and get across it and hopefully give yourself a leg up on the Supercoach competition. You can use my code PIGDRSC10 to get 10% off that season guide. So PIGDRSC10. Chuck that in and get yourself away.
And if, on top of what Pig just mentioned, in terms of the content we have, we're looking at about 270 pages of content. So that includes the articles that we mentioned in this. So Pig and I, we go through and break down the top 4 mids at each club, captaincy articles, how to pick the best starting side. We've got a special guest to come on and talk about rookies for all of you. We've got an article on the flex. We've got a Supercoach dictionary, so that's something novel which we've come up with in terms of defining some of the key terms that Pig and I have been throwing out throughout this podcast as well. Team by team previews, that all the teams analysed by a content creator that supports that team or knows a bit about that team. Sorry, Pigs ended up with West Coast, so I don't know how that's happened.
I don't know how I got that, but so good.
And then on top of that, we'll also have a little section in there focused on preseason notes. As the preseason matches happen, we'll be updating that. It's all online. You can go and order at supercoachswordplay.com. It's pre-ordered just for the moment, but if you use the code that Pig mentioned, PIGDRSC10, PIGDRSC10, you'll get 10% off and you'll get automatic access to that season guide as soon as we release it in the coming weeks.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for your time, Janath. I think that was a really great chat about captaincies, fixtures. I feel like it's been the longest episode I've had, but you and I could just talk for ages. I feel like
it's good, mate.
We align well. So thanks very much for your time.
Appreciate it.
And I'm sure we'll be chatting with you throughout the year.
Thanks, Pig. I greatly appreciate it. It's an honour to come on the channel, talk with you, and be on the DRSC channel as well. Greatly appreciate it. So, yeah, love it.
Cheers. And for those watching along, don't forget to subscribe. Turn your notifications on because we're now 4 done, but still 6 more of these to go. So there's plenty more coming out.